Okay, so hi everyone. I hope you're well. Thank you to the group and to Matthew for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you all this morning about what I feel is not only a core topic of the IOSH competency framework of strategy, planning and leadership management, but a core subject that we as health and safety practitioners, consultants and smart individuals need to be keeping abreast of, and that is the topic of resilience. I'm by no means a resilience expert, and I have by no means got this down to fine art yet. I'm still learning, but I have experienced resilience when I worked with the ambulance service. Really, what I want to share with you this morning is my own journey, what's and all, and some bite-sized, easy, memorable tips to building resilience, both personally and professionally, so that we're all building resilience for the future. I'm not going to start off with the usual of my experience, background, and how I got into health and safety. You can find out all that sort of information about me out on the internet. But I want to dive straight in and tell you more about me and my own journey of resilience. So there's been various elements in my own life whereby I look back and I think, gosh, Scott, you really were resilient to weather something like that. Like many of us, I've experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, commonly known as ACEs, with parental divorce when I was younger. I also moved from nations from England to Scotland at the age of 10, and I was at 4 different schools in the space of 2 years. And I did experience my fair share of bullying due to my English accent at the time, which is why I changed my accent in order to fit in, and that seems completely ludicrous now. I lost grandparents at a young age, and a dear family member, my stepdad, passed away about 3 years ago now. And that brought on depression and very dark feelings for me, as he was the first really close person to me that passed away when I was at an age to understand those feelings. Then 2 years ago, my wife and I were ripped off by a builder, and our house was literally turned upside down. And that's something that we're just coming to finishing off just now. And then just recently, I was unsuccessful at my IOSH fellowship interview. Now, I don't tell you all of that as a pity party or to try and get you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you those stories as a reminder to all of us that life can be unfair at times. And like me, you probably haven't had it that easy either. Let's face it, what we do as a day job is not the easiest, but personally, I love it. I love the opportunity I have to help others, to influence and inspire, to make a difference, to do the right thing, and to make small changes for the better for the people who work for my clients. In preparation for this morning, I was reflecting upon my own journey, and I asked myself, what have I learned along the way and what makes me resilient? And I think at this point, it's worth asking yourself a similar question for reflection purposes. So for me, what I've learned is that I'm a tenacious individual, full of grit. Someone once described me as being like a dog with a bone, pardon the expression. I've learned patience, I've learned to trust the process, to be careful of who I trust, to dig deep, to keep going no matter what comes my way, as I know that I will be stronger as a result. You'll notice that I'm using Ellis Whittam slides this morning. However, this isn't an Ellis Whittam talk, but do please feel free to check us out. So let's start with the definition of resilience then. It comes from the Latin word resilio, which means to bounce back or to recoil like a spring. When we learn new skills, it's perfectly normal to be nervous or anxious. Take learning to drive as an example. We were all nervous, but over time we hardwire our brains, whereby driving now just becomes an automatic task that we undertake. This is because myelin in our brains creates routes whereby the more we do certain new activities, the more we are literally rewiring our brains from anxious thoughts to automatic tasks. So never be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. And I say that with a cautious approach, given the job that we all do. Please don't go and try and do a Desir assessment if you've got no experience, qualifications or skills, or are simply not competent in conducting one of these. In his book, Resilience, Rick Hanson talks about our brains are largely the same since time has begun, and about 3 basic human needs that we all have. Those 3 needs are safety, satisfaction, and connection. And for me, that's much easier to remember than Maslow's hierarchy. Furthermore, he introduces the model of a pressure gauge, where you can imagine the gauge in front of you being red at the bottom, with the middle upper part being green. The red zone represents fear, frustration, and hurt, and the green zone, peace, contentment, and love, our sweet spot, so to speak. So what we're trying to do with resilience here is to take reasonable steps to spend most of our time in the green zone with flickering back and forth into the red zones, sort of like pressure regulating. I'm sure we all have our favorite superhero characters, and mine is Iron Man. And I was thinking about what characteristics do I like about Iron Man? And what I would suggest it is his speed, his durability, his agility, his regenerative life support. Now that definitely would be nice to have. Not to mention, he's a genius. Don't worry, I'm not going to open up the questions at the end of the session as to why you think Iron Man is better than Batman or Aquaman, Scott. But have a think of who is your favorite superhero and why. What makes them your favorite character? And what characteristics would you like to emulate from them? And please don't say fly. I was then having to think about what makes a person resilient. What are the key attributes? And I believe it's having an awareness of what is going on around you, how you handle your own and other emotion, how you handle yours and others' emotional reactions to situations, and resilience skills. So Dr. Ginsberg believes that there are 7 resilience skills, and these are competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. I'll say those again. Competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. I think we would all do well to educate ourselves in those skills in order to hone our own resilience. Like a tree, we need to have deep roots that can support us and give us the framework on which to stand strong against life's challenges. I became fascinated throughout COVID and lockdown with well-being and this idea of emerging as a hunk, drunk, or chunk. I think the first lockdown last year, I emerged as a chunk and a drunk. However, this year, I was determined for my own physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being to emerge as a hunk. Well, I am still trying. You know from the fitness industry that if you don't have a strong core, your body has lost strength, and it's then hard to maintain strength in any shape or form. If you've ever suffered a bad back, you'll know that having a strong core by undertaking core exercises is key to preventing any revisits to the chiropractor, of whom you can easily spend £500 trying to cure you. Trust me, I have been there, and yes, I have got the t-shirt. Movement is something we all need to be focusing on for future resilience to ensure that we do not remain static. And there's a great TED talk by Roger Frampton titled Why Sitting Down Destroys You. And I use this in DSE and manual handling training, where he talks about gymnasts who have a strong core because they focus on movement. Hashmi and Arnold, in their 2021 book titled Governance and Leadership in Health and Safety, say health and safety is nothing but resilience assurance, reliability management, and just good business. I love that. Again, resilience is being intertwined into health and safety, which is something that we've all been talking about for a long time now in terms of business continuity plans and other areas. However, it's only just now that we're starting to talk directly about being resilient health and safety practitioners. So we need to have a strong core to deliver the future of health and safety. And in particular, the next IOSH work strategy, amongst other professional and personal aims, goals, and targets that undoubtedly I'm sure you will have and that you'll be aiming towards, not to mention anything that comes out of left field like COVID did. So from COVID, I asked myself, what are the things that I need to have or to do to be resilient going forward? And so I developed this acronym CORE, which is capitalize, observe, reinvent, educate. And I'll walk you through more of these just now. So I believe that we need to capitalize upon opportunities. I think COVID did all of us a favor, whereby it raised our profiles of what we do on a daily basis and the importance of our profession. For instance, the last 18 months have taught me that actually I've got something to say and something pretty worthwhile sharing with others, hence why I'm speaking with you all this morning. We need to consider opportunities that present themselves right in front of us, both globally, given the future reach all of us now have in the world, and domestically. We need to engineer our future by considering opportunities that are available to us. We need to say no to the wrong opportunities and yes to the right ones. And I know this sounds cheesy, but our time is very precious. And it takes us using the reasonably practical balancing model of knowing in your gut what is the right opportunities for us. I believe we need to capitalize upon creativity. So Dr. Harry Barry says to be a successful problem solver requires patience, adaptability, creativity, and a solution-based focus. So we need to be creative and to capitalize on our opportunities to use our creativity. We need to find ways to be unique and stand out. So I'm a quirky individual, and I try to find or look for inspiration in non-health and safety areas, such as the wildlife, signs that I see, when I'm at the gym, or when random thoughts come to me or come to mind when I'm driving along. I try to use practical, relatable experiences to capture the attention of those I encounter on a daily basis in order to tell a story of health and safety. We have to be creative in order to stay relevant and fresh in how we deliver health and safety, particularly with a solution-based focus. And I believe we can do that by asking ourselves, who is my audience and how do I reach them? And what is the most efficient, memorable way for them to understand health and safety? I believe we need to capitalize upon competence. So you may have found yourselves in situations where as a consultant, you have felt inadequate, like I have, or indeed have felt imposter syndrome. We need to be careful about competence, absolutely. However, I do believe that we need to maximize these opportunities to grow ourselves. We want to be practitioners that are around for a long time, who are resilient, battle ready, weather hardened, agile, able to cross over with other important business areas. And it can be easy to settle, and that's when complacency sets in. And as practitioners, we need to ensure that we do not settle for second best. I believe we need to capitalize upon conflict resolution. So as the Winston Churchill quote on the screen says, there's an opportunity in every difficulty. Conflict resolution is a key of what we all do, and as skilled practitioners, having those skills to be persuasive and to resolve conflict help us to be resilient in the future. I also believe we need to capitalize on opportunities by having a plan. So take myself as an example. I'm 37 years old with 15 years health and safety experience, yet I still have another 30 odd years to work before I retire. So I've set myself a career mind map that looks something like this. It isn't finished, by the way. I need to ensure that both professionally in terms of skills, knowledge, ability, training, and experience, and personally in terms of my physical, emotional, and spiritual strengths are strong for the journey ahead. We need to know where we've come from in order to know where we are going. So for me, only of recent years did I find out that my grandfather was killed in a work-related accident in the Liverpool dockyards, and that my biological father was a union safety rep in a factory in the northwest of England. So I'm a second generation practitioner, and by knowing these parts of my life, it's given me extra confidence and purpose of why I do what I do. Mike Tyson said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. As practitioners, we need to have backup plans in case our first plans don't succeed. We need to have a purpose in order to be resilient, and a mantra is a good way to remind ourselves of why it is we do what we do. My mantra is to help people. We also need to have dreams, and you're never too young or too old to start dreaming. And we need to follow our dreams. So my dream is to travel the world, and I think that's entirely possible now with health and safety being of global interest. Walt Disney, the guy who came up with the idea of Imagineering, once said, "Don't dream your life, live your dream." I also believe that we need to capitalize on mentoring. Volunteering and mentoring are great ways to give back to our communities, and it boosts our own well-being and resilience. A good mentoring or coaching model is this one of a compass, whereby you've got a person that's at your north, so that's a person that's ahead of you on the journey, of whom you can learn from. You have east-west, so that's your peers and friends. As the Bible says, iron sharpens iron, and that is what good friends and peers do. They support you and they sharpen you to be better. And then you have south, which is someone you can mentor and build, pass on tips and support to. One of the other things that I believe that we all need to have or to plan for is having a life mentor, which is that one person who can support us and champion us throughout life. I believe we need to observe what's happening around us. So as practitioners, I find that we almost become workplace chaplains, where we become a safe person to talk to when we are within an organization. We need to see ourselves as change agents who have empathy to help others. We need to observe what is happening in the world of others who we encounter and are around us, and to be aware of clues to where people are struggling. We also need to observe what is happening in the news and what is happening around us amongst our peers, again, in order to stay relevant. I believe we need to observe what's happening inside ourselves. So many of us are too hard on ourselves, and we need to talk to ourselves rather than listening to those voices inside our heads. The other thing I've learned to do is to forgive myself when something doesn't quite work out as I planned. And there's a great book which I've referenced at the end of these slides titled Fail Forward by John Maxwell, with this idea of failing forward and not losing, but learning. Another good book is Dr. Harry Barry's Emotional Resilience, where he says, if you can learn to let go of self-rating, accept yourself unconditionally, and cease to believe that you can ever be a failure as a person, the mental health benefits you will reap can be immense. You see, we're not perfect, and there has been links between perfectionism and health disorders. So it's important that we're not too hard on ourselves. Les Brown says the good times we put in our pocket and the bad times we put in our heart. We need to be kind to ourselves as practitioners and remind ourselves often that any person who's trying to implement change will come across adversity, but the successful person has the capacity to manage disappointments and losses. How many of us have had a great day with, say, 20 positive experiences that happen to us, and then that one negative experience comes along, and that's all we can focus on for the rest of the day? So we need to train ourselves to accept and tolerate frustration in order to grow resilient. Charles Swindoll once said, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. I believe we need to observe what can be done through us. So we need to support each other as fellow change agents. And remember, we're all working towards the same goal. We need to speak encouragement into each other's lives. And some of the most powerful words one person can say to another is, I believe in you, you can do it. We also need to observe what can be done through all of us to influence and inspire all people within an organization, and in particular the boardroom. Then we need to start teaching others of whom we come across and deal with about resilience techniques, particularly when we're talking or thinking about or managing stress and mental health. And I believe we need to observe in our own inner resources. So I try and give myself a word at the start of each year, and this year and last year, the word was focus. And thank goodness, given the year that we've just had in the last 18 months, it was this word. Other things I try and do is to remind myself to have a good sense of humour. It helps to smile and to give myself opportunities to consciously feel good. The mind is like a garden, and we often need to regularly do planting and weeding. I think the other thing that we need to do often is to draw on our inner resources to model vulnerability. And vulnerability gives permission as a leader, which is what we all are, to others who are struggling to also speak up, and it then creates synergy and energy within a team. I believe we need to reinvent ourselves, so don't be afraid to go back to basics. We need to pace ourselves for the journey ahead, as it can be a long one, and we need to enjoy it. And I believe how we can do that is by doing the following things. So I believe that we need to reinvent ourselves through breathing. Box breathing is something that I've recently learned from Blair Boyd. And this helps when you're dealing with complaints and demands from your clients. It helps us to listen to our bodies, as you're using this technique to slow yourself down, which is something that I regularly need to do. Box breathing is where you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, and then hold for 4 seconds. And you repeat that box until you then feel reinvented or recentered. I believe we need to reinvent ourselves through journaling. So Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, and many other Stoics before them, which is a person who can endure pain or hardship without showing their feelings or complaining, use journaling. And journaling is essentially a way of exercising the mind, taking the time to document and reflect upon the past and present in order to shape the future. I use a Smart Planner journal, and I also have a life goals journal in order to do this. However, I am going to be honest, and personally, this is an area in my life that I can do much better at. I believe we need to reinvent ourselves through meditation, so things like practicing yoga. But also remember, reflection is not just for the purposes of IOSH and CPD. We all subconsciously use plan, do, check, and act for our goals, but how many of us actually meditate on that journey of reinventing ourselves regularly? Again, it's an area that I can do better at. I believe we need to reinvent ourselves through the usages of refuges. And a refuge is a safe space that we can go to for recuperation, and we all need one. Mine is cycling, It's that one place where I feel energized to process my thoughts, to push my body and to rest my body from the fiery darts that have come my way. I was at the gym last week and I was sat in the steam room, and don't worry, this is a clean story, when I noticed a sign that I've seen probably 100 times that reads "Caution, steam outlet." And this got me thinking about, what is your outlet, Scott? What's your way of processing or allowing steam to escape from the internals? And for me, I enjoy spending time in the garden and get my fingers in the soil. And apparently, when you get your hands dirty, bacteria within the soil triggers the release of serotonin in our brains, which is a happy chemical, a natural antidepressant, and it strengthens the immune system. So what's your steam outlet? What places can you go to escape? I believe we need to reinvent ourselves through R&R, which is military slang for rest and recuperation. Sleep is so important, and I don't think we put enough emphasis as human beings on sleep. Even the odd weekend cat nap does wonders for me. You need to have mindfulness and to take care of the mind. After all, a full mind is not good for anyone. For instance, I nearly burnt out at the start of June by doing too much, i.e. I suffered from fatigue. And the picture that you can see on the screen of me is me kayaking at Loch Lomond in August, chilling out and getting refreshed. And I think that what we've all learned through COVID is that we can travel within our own beautiful countries in order to have R&R. Adam Savage says, calm people live and tense people die. I, for one, want to be a calm person, and I'm sure you do too. I believe we can reinvent ourselves through strength training. So too many of us focus on our weaknesses when in fact what we need to be doing is focusing on our strengths. When fitness training, you mix up the types of work you do in order to build muscles from a variety of exercises, which then build strength in order to improve your body and gives you durability and work capacity. What is interesting is that the brain can quit before your body, according to Ross Edgley, where he says that the US Navy SEALs use a 40% rule, whereby the mind tells the body to quit well before the body physically needs to. And I've experienced this myself during Tough Mudder, as you can see from the photograph on your screen, where I had to battle 13 miles of hell to overcome, but overcome I did. And I believe we need to reinvent ourselves through being thankful and grateful. So Robert Emmons has undertook research in this area, and it does show that being thankful and grateful regularly does build resilience. I believe we need to educate ourselves also. So my CPD development plan isn't to be better than anywhere else, it's just to be better than me yesterday. I believe we need to educate ourselves not just in the area of health and safety, but in other areas. So again, take me as an example. I started off with a management diploma, and then I went on to study for a management degree. And it's still an area that I'm very much interested in other business areas that complement health and safety, and in particular, leadership development is an area that I do enjoy researching. There are other skills and areas in which we can educate ourselves. So we all have transferable skills such as problem solving, communication, and project management, to name a few, and we can develop those skills. I've made use of the IOSH employability self-assessment, blueprint, the competency framework, and career hub in order to stimulate thoughts of where I can educate myself further. We can also educate ourselves to become better mentors. I believe we need to educate ourselves about our own bodies and our eating patterns. So for me, I suffer with an autoimmune condition that has led me on a fascinating journey to understand the gut and gut bacteria and how your body performs and reacts after eating certain foods. So I believe we all do need to learn about ourselves more and how we perform after eating certain foods. I believe we need to embrace the future. I think the future of health and safety is likely to require a more agile, adaptable, and resilient practitioner who needs to have a diverse range of skills and particularly reaches of knowledge of other important business areas like I just mentioned, in terms of such things like HR, finance, amongst others. I think health and safety will become an ingrained discipline that features at the board table, with more and more health and safety practitioners influencing and perhaps featuring as chief risk officers. Pandemics and epidemics will feature largely, as will global travel. Also, psychology and how the mind works, I believe, will also feature heavily, So if you look at COVID and the concerns that were arisen from that, never mind thinking about nanotechnology. There used to be a game show called Hole in the Wall, whereby contestants had to make themselves the same shape as featured on a moving wall that was approaching them, or face being pushed into a pool of water. We as health and safety practitioners need to ensure that we are flexible to go through the moving walls that come at us and to ensure that we're not left behind. I believe that we need to educate ourselves in languages. So as I've mentioned, we've become a global community, and therefore I believe learning a language is going to be a key area for future practitioners, whether you're working domestically or internationally. I believe we need to educate ourselves by reading books. So Neil Fisher inspires me with his reading lists, as do other people I follow on social media. Don't just read health and safety. Pick a wide selection of influential topics in which to shape you as an individual. So I read more in wintertime, given the poor weather in the UK, and it was interesting for me to learn that in ancient Greece, not many wars were fought in winter, but this time was used to hone skills. I believe we need to educate ourselves about our settings. So as consultants, we end up in a variety of settings and environments. And for me, confidence has developed from knowing what I'm talking about through reading, studying, and practicing what I'm preaching, regardless of the setting or environment that I may find myself. I believe we need to educate ourselves about specialisms. So specialisms are good to have. However, this is something I've always struggled with personally, as I wouldn't say I was particularly a specialist in any area. However, if I were to say where my strengths lie, then it would have to be in education, town and parish councils, and fire safety. I was pleased to learn that our ancestors didn't have specialisms either. They were generalist hunter-gatherers. Therefore, don't worry if you too struggle to find your niche. Being a generalist is okay. Also, with specialisms, we need to be careful that we don't back ourselves into a corner by just having one specialism. So to recap, I believe we need to capitalize on our opportunities, to observe our surroundings, to reinvent ourselves regularly, and to educate. I really believe that in the future, it's not going to be enough to just be a health and safety practitioner. We're all going to need other arrows for our bows. So when Matthew asked me what I wanted to talk about, I said to him that I hear a lot of people talking about mental health and well-being. But what I don't hear much of is people talking about health and safety practitioners and consultants in particular about their own health and well-being or resilience. And that's how this modeling developed. So some good resources that have helped me on my journey so far, and as I said, I'm still learning, but I share them with you in case they may help you also. So one thing is a book about doing that one thing that you need to do in your day before you get interrupted, which I'm sure, like me, it happens. Leading on Empty is a book that says we all need a full tank, and it helps us to understand how to refill your tank and to find passion. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn is a book about that we don't lose, we learn. Failing Forward and Emotional Resilience, as I've mentioned. Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess is a good book. Mental Health and Wellbeing, I would suggest, is a must read for all health and safety practitioners. The Art of Resilience, I would highly recommend. It's a book that I've just finished, and it's a great book whereby Ross swam around the UK. And What Everybody is Saying is a book about the art of body language and how to read what a person's body is telling you. So I love this topic of resilience, and I almost feel like this morning has only just scratched the surface and been part one of what we as health and safety practitioners can do to be resilient for the future. So watch this space. I may be back next year for part 2. So in closing, Gifford Thomas in his book, The Inspirational Leader, believes that millennials are changing the world of work. And as a millennial, I do believe this is the case. Malcolm Gladwell has a book called Tipping Point, and I believe that we are just on the edge of a monumental shift as health and safety practitioners and consultants of a tip towards health and safety by the world. I was asked last week to review a book, and I was informed by that person that I was quite a thought leader. And I was chuffed to pieces when this observation was made. And one I can't say I'd noticed about myself, but I'm going to embrace that observation for my future. So I hope that I've given you some thoughts this morning that stimulate you towards future resilience. If you'd like to connect or to chat with me, you can find me on the internet and specifically on LinkedIn. Thank you all for listening to me this morning. Are there any questions?
We've got a couple of questions coming here, Scott. Thanks for that presentation. I mean, I personally found it incredibly interesting, and there's certainly some food for thought for myself in terms of resilience and taking time out and focusing on myself a little bit more, which I think we're all probably guilty of not doing. Particularly with recent events, we've been carried away with things a little bit more than what we usually would. So really good session there, really informative, and thank you on behalf of myself and the consultancy group for presenting to us today. I do have a couple of questions that have come in, if you don't mind taking some time out to answer them, and we'll try and get through those ones that we've got available to us. If we don't get through them all, then I'm sure Scott will be happy to answer those following the event. So the first question comes from Chris. How difficult do you find applying some of these skills to help better you? A lot of what you are saying relates to but. It relates to but it's where to start is probably my biggest problem.
Yeah, it can be difficult, to be honest. I think mentoring is an area in which to start. So you are helping other people, but you also need that person ahead of you in order to shape your own journey. Also, journaling, I find that incredibly useful. So a way to think about where you're currently at, as I mentioned, where you've come from and where would you like to go forward. So I think a lot of us, when we either start off in health and safety or whether we've been in health and safety for a long time, tend to just focus on health and safety. But I think where we are at just now in the world is we need to start thinking about where are those other things that we need to be doing in order to sharpen our own skills. And I think certainly for my own research and where the journey I've shared with you this morning, where I've come from, is we need to think about what are those other sort of pieces of our armor, so to speak, that we need to strengthen. So almost kind of doing like a SWOT analysis on ourselves.
Thanks, Scott. Great answer. Somebody else has also mentioned that they have a autoimmune disease and find it hard to fully invest in progressing their job and career with the fatigue of my condition. How would you suggest that they manage this?
Difficult one, yeah. So I mentioned I also suffer with an autoimmune condition. I think, again, this is learning about ourselves. So how we react, where we know those stress triggers are, what we can do to de-stress. So as I mentioned, I spend time in the garden, cycling, in the gym. So knowing what those triggers are, and then knowing ourselves how we can sort of manage those triggers to the best of our ability. Research is key as well. It's often I tend to now not rely on the medical route. I tend to rely on myself and what I can learn through what I eat, how I deal with things myself, how I process my thoughts, and what I can do.
Thanks, Scott. I think they'll find that very useful. Somebody else says, I appreciate the benefit of writing down feelings and emotions during a meditation session. However, when I try to do it myself, I find it a bit difficult. I do not know where to start or what kind of question to ask myself. Do you have any advice, or can you give your experience on how you started journaling?
Yeah, so for the first part of that, I would suggest the East-West model I showed earlier. So if you've got some good friends that you really that are good friends that you can trust and have those open conversations with. So if you're struggling to do it alone, try and get some people together and do it together if you can, if you find that works for you. And then what was the second part, Matt?
He said it was basically the example of, sorry, I've switched that over to answered. I think it was about how to start the journaling.
How to start the journaling.
Get
a journaling book. I think the reason that we struggle with journaling, it becomes another thing that we have to do in our day. So I think it's almost that habit that we need to start. And there's loads of books out there and about habits, and are they a length of time, but it's that one thing that we can give ourselves that is about us. So for instance, I was running last year, the end of last year and the start of this year, and I ended up having damage to my Achilles. But when I was speaking to a friend, he said what you need to do is you need to build in a habit of strength training. So for instance, when he's brushing his teeth, he does calf raises. So his brushing his teeth becomes that moment of the habit of, I need to do calf raises. So if you can almost develop a habit that then makes you do until you've then learned that habit, then I think that's a good way of starting, journaling.
Thanks, Scott. One question here. How do you recognize when your own resilience is fading, and what do you do to quickly reset yourself?
Stress and fatigue. Usually it's because we don't have enough time in the day, or there's so many other things going on in the life with kids, work, our personal commitments. One of the things I'm guilty of doing is overcommitting. So I'm the type of person, if I say I'm going to do something, I follow through in that. So I think we have to know what's our capacity. You have people who are high capacity and they can juggle lots of balls, like we were talking about earlier on, and not drop them. But if you're like me, you want to try and do something really well, and you don't want to do sort of 100 things sort of half-hearted. So I think it's knowing your own capacity and what you can do well in order to then make sure that fatigue doesn't, slip in.
Thanks, Scott. And then another one here. So somebody mentions that they're preparing for their IOSH fellowship, and interest in knowing how you felt after the resolution of your interview, and how did you overcome it? Do you have any advice for preparing for a negative outcome?
Don't prepare for a negative one, prepare for a positive one. I put if you join my LinkedIn, or you follow me on LinkedIn, I put a video on LinkedIn afterwards, basically saying I'm quite a determined individual, so I'm gonna get it. It might just not been my time this year round. I think preparation is about getting a mentor, making sure that your portfolio is right before submitting it, and then having that sort of peer mentoring in terms of going through the fellowship interview. There is a mentoring group for the Chartered Fellowship interview out of the West of Scotland branch. Blair Boyd is the man to speak to if you're interested in joining.
Someone's asked here, how can you manage progression in terms of learning when you have the will but no financial backup? Do you have any advice for this?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Probably like me, you see often courses advertised from various parties, and you can't financially, commit to it for one reason or another. I think there's lots of free information out there these days. So the IOSH Careers Hub, you can access that. It's got a wealth of information on there, and it's not just health and safety. There's career development opportunities as well. YouTube is a great way. There's various speakers, TED Talks, and all that sort of stuff on there that you can access free. So that would be sort of my go-to areas. Podcasts, again, that's another great way. I think in terms of future resilience, it's not just in health and safety, as I mentioned and repeat. We have to think about what are the other areas where that stimulate thoughts in us to be better health and safety practitioners and consultants.
Thanks, Scott. And someone said, I find it difficult not focusing on the one negative thing that overshadows the good things I've completed. Do you find meditation useful in letting go the need to control every detail, being too meticulous?
Yeah, 100%. Because as I say, I've not on the finished journey, but I'm better than what I was 12 months ago, and that's the whole aim of my CPD plan. So yeah, it can be difficult because you can have 100 people say that this talk was, this morning was good, and then one person says it wasn't, and that's the one thing that you then focus on. So perspective is the thing that I think we need to be better and training ourselves at. Is that actually yes, reflection is an important part of what we all do, and we need to reflect on how we can be better, but we shouldn't, be focusing completely on that one negative that's happened in a day.
Okay, thanks, Scott. There's a couple of questions coming through in terms of reference, the books that you've referenced, but I know they were in the presentation slides. And for those of you that have asked about that, the presentation will be available after the session. So just keep an eye out on your email inboxes, and that'll drop in there. And the references to those books, I think that Scott went through in the session, will be included in there. So I think that's it. Sorry. So one question says, Scott speaks of his career almost like a calling. Is there a way to develop an enjoyment in the career as opposed to it's just a job? It's a great question.
Very good question. Yeah. The part I talked about in terms of learning about my grandfather and my father, my biological father, has only come about of recent years. So I think you need to understand, as I say, what you did previously, what you're doing currently, and where would you like to end up. So your calling is almost sort of learning through various elements in your life, so physical, emotional, and spiritual elements, and mentally as well, if you think about it, of what it is that you feel called to. And for me, again, of recent years, I've just learned through various sources of why I feel I'm called to health and safety and to helping people. And I think the way, in terms of what I said with regards to the tipping point, I think health and safety is definitely, from what I've seen out there from various people, is definitely tipping and shifting towards caring more for people. And as practitioners, if we can demonstrate that actually we're caring for people and that's what it's all about, then sort of the compliance part will be done. But so we're coming at this a different way from, say, 15 years ago when I first started on this journey.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much for that, Scott. And I think that's about it in terms of questions. Some of the other stuff is just a couple of statements. So look, on behalf of the consultancy group, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today, Scott. I found it very interesting and informative. And some of the comments that are coming through, I think everybody else has on the call. We had some good numbers in today. Hopefully somebody can take at least one thing away from this session today that they can take back and invest in themselves. And I think that training that you're talking about is absolutely, to become the best at what we are, we have to do that training and put that groundwork in. And I think there's lots of great tips there from yourself, Scott, that I think a lot of people will benefit from today. So Scott, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, everybody who's joined us today. Keep your eye out on your inboxes for the presentation and the recording of this session. And we also have another lineup of events coming from the consultancy group. So please keep an eye on your inboxes, and we look forward to seeing you at more of our webinars in the future. Scott, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody.
You're welcome. Thank you. Cheers. Take care.